explain his views on that, which are more classical.
I think they're something other than human spirit. I think they're a separate species of themselves. I think they were never human. I think they existed before humanity, and they have their own society, so to speak. They're a separate species, a spiritual species, but very separate from human beings. They've never walked the earth in human form as we know humanity, and they have the wisdom of the ages. They possess the wisdom of the ages. Usually when it's a demonic haunt, it will be very systematic. They will be trying to break down a person's psyche so they can infiltrate that person, break them down, make them pliable, brainwashing, so to speak, through terrorism. It's terrorist tactics. And things will happen systematically. For example, things will happen in threes. You get 3 knocks. Things will come in threes. That's one sure indication. Certain people will be targeted. They'll be targeted, and the spirit will play upon their weaknesses. What frightens them, that's what it will use. If they have a psychological weakness, it will use that and employ to break the person's psyche down.
And although I have differing views on what might be their origins, it's all unknown, and I've observed they do seem responsive to a religious provocation. That's a commonality with a demonic influence.
So is that how you would test it when you go into a place? Would you
That would be
give
one
some
test.
religious provocation to see if it does react?
I think many times our clients, coupled with the groups that have called us in, because many times we're not called in as near, we're called in as consultants for other paranormal research groups. And they've already pretty much done the research and come up with the fact that they're dealing with something out of their league.
Yeah, they've called you in. And when you go in, and do you handle, if you think it's a non-human spirit, would you handle that completely different to if it was a human spirit when you go in on an investigation?
Generally, we would handle it very differently. Of course, it depends upon the client, too. We have to take the client into consideration, how they're going to react, what their mental and emotional state is at the time. Usually, they do request a blessing or some kind of religious cleansing from us. They know that that's what we do, so they usually request it. It's sometimes difficult getting the family to cooperate in the exact way which would be helpful, but we would, when it gets to that point, we do handle it differently. I mean, we go in with the general equipment like other organizations would and other investigators. That's how we start out. But finally, we're offering a solution, which a lot of other groups do not necessarily offer a solution. They'll say, yes, we think you have phenomena here. Goodbye, and keep in touch. But, we're there to try, hopefully, to offer a solution. And mainly what we do is try to educate people what they're going through, what they might expect, and how they themselves can also take action to try to alleviate this type of trauma, this haunting they're going through.
So I've heard you talking about spirit rescue, you mentioned that as well. Is that different to if you were handling it on?
Well, that's something different. That's something Carl's worked with before in the past.
So you haven't worked with that?
Well, how would you define spirit rescue?
Well, you try to communicate with the spirit, with the personality, the disembodied presence, and try to get it to move along, or at least move away. Try to detach it from the family and its influence over the household. You can do this by speaking to it, especially somebody who has mediumistic abilities, somebody who's a sensitive psychically. They might try to communicate with the spirit, actually communicate and reason with it, and it has seemed effective. Ask the spirit to move on. We might say move into the light, whatever the light is, but just cross over into some other plane of existence, no longer being earthbound. That's not effective with the demonic presence. It can actually antagonize the demon or be totally ineffective altogether. So that's another way, that's another strategy to test whether it's the ghost type or the demonic, the inhuman.
And would you find more inhuman cases that are coming your way compared to human type?
Interesting question.
Yeah. And is it getting more, or?
There's a certain type that we're specifically called into. So quite often it does turn out that we are being called into something because of our specialty, because that's what we specialize in. somebody calls us in, we think we might be, say if it's another organization, other investigators, we think we might be dealing with something that's demonic or inhuman, then they call us in. So we tend to see this more than the average investigator because we're called in at that point. But also I have to say what we deal with a lot is the human aspect, like I was mentioning before. Where's the client coming from emotionally, psychologically, because they could easily be adding to the problem or being manipulated. So it's not that cut and dry. There's a lot of times where somebody's really, you know, dealing with something and they have to make a major life change in themselves too, or in their family, if they really, really want to get rid of this. It's like with alcoholism or addiction to nicotine. You know, they have to really want to get rid of it, and they have to do something to change their lifestyle. Say, or dietary, eating habits. See, something radical has to change.
Do you find that some people do attract this more than...
Yes, some people do. And I think Keith will agree that we found, Sandra will agree that we found that in cases of a demonic invasion, there seems to be some seriously unaddressed or unresolved conflict within the family unit or within an individual. These are instances where the boundaries between psychology and what could be termed parapsychology become less distinct because there is some kind of antagonistic influence. Something is not right. There's an imbalance, and that imbalance needs to be addressed. Often the paranormal activity is the symptom, the scab on the wound, rather than the cause of the strife within.
Till they sorted it out, they're going to...
And so we may recommend that they conduct certain lifestyle changes, alterations in the way they conduct their affairs. If there's the presence of substance abuse, while we act as counselors too, we may go to that step where we actually advise them, you need to evaluate what you're doing with your life and how you're living your life. Perhaps the substance abusing could be partly responsible for this strife within the family. And we find often people resist that. It's a principle I term transference, and it's a psychological principle where the person will project their unrest and their imbalances onto an invading disembodied entity. And that's comforting in a way, because you can say, now that this demon is here, we have all kinds of problems in the house, and we wouldn't have them if the demon was chased out. And it alleviates the responsibility. They can abdicate that responsibility for examining and restructuring their own lifestyles.
So do you find if the people themselves are religious based, it works better when you're working with the entity?
Generally, yes.
Yes,
Exactly. If they have a religious outlook, then that's something we can relate to and deal with accordingly.
I find it even more helpful if they're mentally healthy. Because we have a lot of problems with people contacting us that, as Carl was saying, have mental difficulties, and it's one of our biggest challenges to tease apart what is paranormal and what is has something to do with the person's psychology.
Because I have seen in your site and talked to you, and you've said that you always look at that, which is good.